welcome now to our first panel of the afternoon, which is about From Invisible City to Open Source City. It will be moderated by TANYA TOFT, who is a fellow at the Art and Culture Institute in Copenhagen University. She's a curator, writer, lecturer, and researcher on the topic of urban media and its role in the public space. Also, she's on the International Advisory Board as a curator of two of our Connecting Cities partners at the Open Sky Gallery in Hong Kong and Verbo Cultural in Sao Paulo, and also the co-editor of our Connecting Cities publication. So we're very happy to have you here, Tanya. And with her on the panel are NEREA CALVILLO, curator of Medialab-Prado and University Warwick, DARKO FRITZ from Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb, and LORAINE FURTER from Hybrid Publishing Group based in Brussels. So I pass on the word to you, Tanya, and we're very much looking forward to this interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. And I will first apologize to everybody that my flight is stealing a breakaway. I am happy, though, that Dr. Streitz had his time because it was such an interesting keynote. Thank you very much for that. So I'll just give a short introduction to this panel before introducing the panelists in a little more detail and giving them a chance to speak. And actually, if we consider the first half part of the title of this panel, The Invisible City, or From the Invisible City, this indicates a threshold of two critical paradigms that we have had for a long time and that we are still living within. And these are, on the one hand, that of the visible city, with visibly mediated cityscapes and transmission of media content on urban screens and facades and surfaces. It's a city with images on our screens and mobile devices that are captured by photography and video instantly. So we are instantly seeing this mediated version, this remediated version of our cities while we live in it. It's also a city with a culture of making oneself visible instantly, where you instantly can snap your presence and post this on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And it is a city, or we can think of the visible city as a city with development strategies for urban planning that have been very visually oriented, creating spaces that are visually pleasing, which has some fantastic consequences, but also perhaps sometimes consequences of homogenization, which we can talk about. On the other hand, in the title for the first part, we have the invisible city. And this we can think of in terms of a data-driven, organizational, complex city that we cannot see, but that nonetheless affect our behavioral patterns in the city. And this is organized by technologies for data gathering of microtemporal dimensions of our sensory experience. And these are, for example, technologies that measure locational and environmental conditions, that record biometric data, such as my heartbeat or my skin response or my brain waves. So the technologies that gather and process information, some of which is just our traces. You know, every time we click or every time we move from A to B with our cell phone, we leave a trace. That generates these complex data clouds that might be applied by corporations or other interests to influence our experiences, our choices, and our consciousness, something that we should become increasingly aware of, I think. So these data clouds really mediate between us and our world. So concerns for these two critical paradigms of the visible and the invisible city relate to how the visible and invisible conditions may substitute our will and our agency without us always knowing. Our capacity for acting on the world, our human ability of consciously experiencing our reality. Think of what it really means to experience where we are, the real of where we are, we can say. And our awareness of its systems, its forces, and its hierarchies. So concerns very often relate to concerns for control, surveillance, and confinement. And these issues restrict that rather than enable those creative, active citizens that we want to have in our cities. Now, if we look at the second half of the title, the open source city, this indicates another paradigm, perhaps a more optimistic one, or at least one with a lot of opportunities, especially at the citizen level. So the open source city relies on a philosophy or a culture or a framework for sharing the sources of our cities. And by source, I don't only mean like digital data source, but also those generative forces or those starting points from which things origin, where information comes from. So also our urban our urban archives, our collective memories, and our histories, and that is our sources as well. So the open source city is a city in which we have access to those visible and invisible data or content that shape our everyday lives, where we have access to freely use, reuse, and redistribute that data and information. So the question is, or one of the questions are, how can urban media art help us dealing with these paradigms, create awareness in its citizens about these urban conditions in the contemporary city? And after this very short introduction, I will now introduce our three panelists who have worked curatorially and artistically with urban media art that negotiate, challenge, and employ ideas of visibility, invisibility, and open source. So right here to my left is NEREA CALVILLO, a curator for Medialab-Prado, an architect and assistant professor at Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies at University of Warwick. And before I give you the microphone, I'll just mention that next to you we have DARKO FRITZ, independent artist and curator, commissioned by Museum of Contemporary Art Zagreb to curate projects under the Connecting Cities network. And then at the end of the couch, we have LORAINE FURTER, a Swiss graphic designer, researcher, and curator based in Brussels, specialized in editorial design, and she's part of the Hybrid Publishing Group. So I've invited the panelists to just present for 5 minutes some of the projects that have been initiated, some of them within the Connecting Cities network, and Lorraine's moving a little beyond that too. So I'll just give the microphone to you, NEREA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tanya. So, in Medialab-Prado, I'm going to speak very briefly about the 3 projects that we developed this year under the title Invisible Cities. But I'd like to first contextualize a little bit our approach to the Connecting Cities project and to this very precise topic. So, following Mrs. Kessler's statement, we are thinking about how to use art, and these projects in particular, to try to understand the citizens' capacities in our society and in what we can do with our public spaces. And it's not so much about experience, but it's more about how we can socially and politically engage with our urban space. So, in this year, with the topic Invisible, Visible Cities, we've been trying to imagine how the notion of visibility is more related to what we can see and what is worth seeing in the public space. So not so much what is invisible out there, but what matters to be seen collectively in this public space. So we developed 3 projects mostly. One was considering how citizen technologies can help us invert urban surveillance and change who sees what in the public space. Another one, how a certain format, which is comics, as we will see later, can help to see socially sensitive topics, for example. And the last one, how hacking waves and programming can make visible our digital self and challenge data ownership and protection in the public space. So the first project is Urban Television, and it was a project that decided to, at the beginning, hack CCTV cameras, but with the idea that maybe we can try to think and question who's looking our public spaces and who's monitoring it and who's managing that information. And they proposed, as I said at the very beginning, hacking these CCTV cameras, but then they decided that it was much more interesting to develop a citizen network of webcams to not only monitor, but also to decide where and how to monitor. So the interesting contribution that the Connecting Cities context gave to this project was to try to slow down this decision making in, okay, it's just about making visible what comes out of these webcams, and instead trying to slow down that process and think, so which places do we want to see? Which other public spaces do we want to see within the facade of Medialab-Prado, in this very specific plaza and square that we have? And then what they did was to organize a different set of workshops which they developed with different activist organizations, citizen collectives, and try to think how connecting two different spaces can matter for which kind of activities. And as you can see in this image, for example, they used already existing cameras, but then they developed and located another's. They developed also this technology, this small kit that is independent, provides a very good real-time feed, etc. So they also developed the toolkit. And how some of them are coming soon because they're still in negotiation processes with different buildings, private owners of very, very special locations, but more than anything trying to keep thinking which places, which is something that we found really interesting. And then one of the interesting capacities of this project is that it not only allows, for example, to see in real time another part of the city, which can be useful for certain moments, but it allows the seeing in real time what happens in critical points at very critical times. And for example, I'm sure you're aware of the big, massive demonstrations that took place in the Occupy movement, and then they're still ongoing, and how this platform can help to not only see what's going on in those demonstrations, but also how, for example, police takes really, really strong and excessive force against citizens. So it can also be a way of surveilling and contributing to a citizen empowerment at that level. And they also try to provide different types of visualizations so that one could analyze the data in many different ways. So it also becomes a resource for future analysis of what has happened in the urban space. Then the project Hidden Histories, which I'm sure it's going to be developed further immediately, but very briefly, this project tried to think how archives can help us understand our society, our culture, what's going on. And in collaboration with an existing group in Medialab-Prado, which was working already with an activist archive that was the result of the Occupy movement, precisely, they started having these workshops and trying to think what of that archive mattered to be seen in the public space of Media Lab. And they started thinking how it could become a laboratory of self-expression. So they did a couple of workshops there, some of them online as well, in order to try not only to come up with a content, but also provide them the tools so that citizens could upload material and search the archive in the future. So with all these workshops, they came up with the idea that maybe comics were a really interesting object that was part of the archive, but that could be expanded also through workshops and participation of not only people related to this group, but also to other citizens. Open the workshop to whoever wanted to contribute within the city. And then they developed all these different small comic pieces in which, as you can see, they allowed people to express and discuss issues that otherwise wouldn't have been possible in the public space because of censorship, because of institutional awareness. So in the end, the comic was a means of being able to express artistically, but also socially, certain interests and personal political interests, I would say. And the last project is a Candygram, which was developed to try to challenge and understand how our private data flies and travels within the public space. So also through workshops trying to understand the technology on how to capture that data, this performance allowed different people to have visible their own personal online profile, and therefore challenge and understand how our personal data travels and relates also to notions of security, where our data comes from, which one becomes more visible and how within the digital, but also what happens when you make it public you make it open in the public space.
Sure.
So you can see the building media facade of Museum of Contemporary Art Zagreb. That's something that we've been dealing with. So it's built in the newly building. It's a couple of years old. And the work you can see here, it's Particle Falls by Andrea Poli, American artist. And it's data visualization of air pollution in real time. So one of these kind of invisible things that actually so this is Andrea in front of the work, and she comes with two technicians, and they set up a system that actually they adapt for this Zagreb project. We've been discussing using public data that's available in Zagreb by two bodies. One is city, another one is republic. They both do have public display of air pollution data. But finally, we come into the make our own system, and this is kind of do-it-yourself technology. So I'm snapshotting different kinds of approaches that it's possible to use in such a projects. So we've been choose for do-it-yourself one. This is Raspberry Pi, free modules that have been set up at very location and done real-time data processing that results, which set it up at the building of museum, and it looks like this, very eyes-pleasing, and it stayed this for a month. So it was also kind of durational things. It was a challenge, unlike many other Connecting City projects that been more temporarily based. So we can choose. We combine the both. I'll come to that later. But coming back to this data, public data of the open source city, to address that question, we did, while announcing this project, we did link to the public data information. That was, we get an access to such a data, not directly in visualization, but we incorporate it in the project. I mean, this guy's been very open for collaboration. This is an snapshot of web page that is linked from our page. So that kind of project was very showing this invisible thing visible in the literal sense. Another project by Ghana think tank, another American group, that actually have a basic idea to invert power structures, who is solving which problems. So basically the problems are collected in so-called first world, and some think tank groups in so-called third world solving the problems. So how we done it? First, we collect, so it's a different engagement of the citizens. We made a questionnaire. We collected more than 100 problems, and we done it over the 1 month. It was the biggest ever amount of questions collected in one of the projects, because this guy is doing that for some time. The website, which was developed in fact Liverpool as part of this project that is used, so this kind of partnership developed within CCN project, was used further in Zagreb. And we collect very analog. We had the postcards for collecting programs and questionnaire. Then these questions been sent into the think tanks, like one of those here on the picture in so-called third world, and they come back with some kind of answers. Then we come to some kind of temporary event. So we are in, you see here Museum of Contemporary Art in the background across the huge crossroad, and we are here on the entrance of the shopping mall where we set up. So here is the spot, here's the media facade, and there is next to the entrance to, and you see this strange thing here, which was kind of grabbing attention. And this is actually a performance by Ghana think tank that took place and showing the screens and the problems so people can add new problems in it and interact. And it's a huge amount of people that pass by and interact with this. And you can see environment. And actually it was very handy that across the street you can see already displayed answers from the previous think tank. So it was connecting describe all the steps of the project with the different parts of participation of the citizens on a very different level. And it was also as well open online participation. And the last project we made in a technical from Berlin technical tech collective. They had an idea to join one designer and one NGO, non-governmental organization. We sent them to Helsinki as part of this connected network collaborations. They've been instructed there how to make, let's say, PR action, and they've done this. So, sorry, it's in Croatian. It's about housing. And in Croatia, in transition period through the 90s, the whole social housing system was destroyed, let's put it this way, and very badly done privatization, and the sector is in the mess. And these guys looking into kind of side, because this museum is located in New Zagreb, built in the 60s for more than 200,000 people, been solved the housing problem during the socialistic period, let's put it this way. And the new system cannot cope with this housing problem anymore. So these guys attend in the very location of New Zagreb, the very housing problem, and we set it up during the Christmas and New Year. Instead of having this commercial buy, Christmas, New Year shopping thing, we said, okay, let's get with this content on such a media facade to remind. And this is done by anti-fascistic female collective, that's their name, and we also like to do something with them that have no direct dealing with Second World War fascism in traditional sense, regardless that actually we do now have these very topics. Unfortunately, we got stuck in the 40s again in Croatia, especially recently with our, even I'm going to say that publicly, in our new appointed Ministry of Culture with dubbing, does Croatia won in the Second World War publicly. Can you imagine that? So we have pro-Nazi Ministry of Culture who does it. So these kind of guys, unfortunately, so this was before that. But we have this situation, unfortunately, which is against the constitution, but things happening like this in Croatia. So, nevertheless, that was the choice to work with them, and actually we like to move it forward, not speaking about classical fascism, but think about like new forms. But unfortunately, if I'll do it the same thing now, probably it's supposed to come a step back. So let's talk about local context. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah?
Thank you. Okay, just checking that it's okay. Okay, so I'll try to be brief. I think time is running. I'd like to quickly present the follow-up of the Hidden Histories project that we initiated in Madrid at Medialab-Prado. In this very different context of Brussels, email, where we are all here. And you can maybe notice the big difference that there is between those two institutions, that there is no big media facade screen here, which moved our question to other kind of questions. And this move was quite interesting because we decided then to change a bit the technologies we were working with to more portable devices and focusing on the mini media facades that we most of us have in the pockets, like the smartphones. And we decided, so the title of this work is Hidden Histories, Public Libraries. And the idea was to, we started from questioning the role of the archive and how to make it possible to emerge in a public space. Those are the kind of hidden histories, or the hidden parts of the city's histories, and here we decided to think about the notion of how can we share materials in a public space, as it used to happen with public libraries, for instance. And here you have an image of the very beginning of public libraries in Switzerland, where we shift from private libraries to public, and especially with the dispositive display that is movable, portable. So the use of wooden crates to move the books to places, for instance, mountainy places. And they're talking about this shift from stagnant water that we see down there to a source that is kind of flowing and moving. This was the tiny introduction to our project. There is also, it brings also a question of the definition between public and private, and the installation or the project we've been working on, which is actually very much more a tool than a proper art piece, and in that sense different in the way we were thinking about it could be reappropriated by the people, and then reaching again this kind of tension or connection between private and public collective space and actors. To make it very short, we used Raspberry Pis, which was already mentioned as a low-tech or DIY technology. Indeed, it is very accessible. I hold one in my hand. It is quite small and super cheap. And we used open source technology to build a kind of small application that make it actually stream a Wi-Fi offline network, which is also something that is very much used and thought about today as to be used in connection with online networks, but that allows to share materials with more privacy, but also challenging the copyright issue and sometimes piracy struggles and so on. So it raises already a lot of questions with this little device, and the fact that it exists only in connection with other devices. So this is a mini computer on which you can connect a lot of other devices, and here we just programmed a software that sets an offline Wi-Fi connection on which you can connect and access. So this was the Raspberry Pi when we presented the project, on which you can access to contents that are only accessible in one place around in a kind of area around this device. And so it makes it possible for people to access to a content only when they're around, and thus creates also new links with the notion of being in a public space. To make it very short, we collaborated with two organizations, one based in, well, three organizations, but two other organizations, one based in Molenbeek, who did work with citizens of Molenbeek and asked them about their most precious objects. Also, to give another image of this neighborhood, we already talked about the very negative image that is spread around this neighborhood. And we were working with this other institution, Bruxelles nous appartient, that works specifically with sound material. So for us, it was also interesting to reintegrate oral traditions and traditions that are often that have been often ejected from official history to make it again part of the hidden history that could re-emerge. I think I'm going to stop here because I don't want to,
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you all three of you for presenting these very interesting projects. I just want to first actually ask a brief question to DARKO and NEREA in particular, because you're curators of the Connecting Cities Network, and just to people here who might not be so familiar with how it works, how has the Connecting, what has it meant to you to realize this project as in this network, as part of this network? Just very briefly.
The group curatorial process have its advantages and disadvantages as well. It was a challenge. There are 11 initial institutions, starting from the technical facilities. You know, you saw the Museum of Contemporary Art have a very specific fixed media facade. Some art we also saw in today's presentation, Ars Electronica, another part, they have completely another kind of effect. So then you need to choose, as I'm talking about practical questions, you need to choose something that may be adopted or so. So practical falls being shown as video projection in Hagen, for example, but have been adopted for completely new visual format for Zagreb. So that kind of things we need to agree upon and find the practical things. I need to start with these technical, practical things, budget-wise and so on. And this collaboration helped to make it realize we cannot make it ourselves from Zagreb point of view, pay expensive travels from United States for a couple of people. But within this kind of shared environment, I'm talking logistically, it was possible. So it is great to collaborate on that level, just to make things done. So from curatorial point of view, we really did had a lot of discussions, and it was a challenge that at least two organizations need to agree with all our different agendas, and it was a challenge. So at least two or more. Like Susan mentioned it, but I think it's necessary to mention. So this is not an average curatorial or like jury-alike situation when you shortlist something and then you said, okay, we go for this first few in realization. And we need to, from year to year, we need to adjust all these criteria. That one is our wishes, and other things that coming from the artworks, and it was dependent from year to year. And also how are we updated with these new notions of what's going on in media art scene and how these questions have been addressed from the citizen participation, and I just described a couple of modes within even a single project. And they describe, so every project have its own take how citizen or participation is audience, all different approaches of people involved in that, not only in showing and visual output of some artwork.
I think I'm going to respond on how Connecting City has been helpful for managing and thinking through our own facade, because Darko has very well explained the dynamics that have been taken within the curatorial team. So for us in Madrid, Connecting Cities has been like a really amazing opportunity on the one hand to test what it means to do things with media facades and to understand ours. So to put it in relation to others and think conceptually, technically, all these issues that Darko has just raised. Also building interesting bonds between institutions. So in the end, there's been collaborations that have been moved beyond the project and established new ones. So that's been very, very productive. And then last but not least, very importantly, the connection and collaboration between international artists and our local contexts, from artists, but also grassroots collectives and people from within Medialab-Prado. So that's been very, very helpful because it has allowed us also to activate in a different way our local networks.
Thank you very much. There's something that I see across these artworks that I'm finding quite interesting, and that is how you negotiate between this, the visible and the invisible, because artwork in public space usually it has an impact. It might not be a resistance as such, but it is always something that interferes with the normal patterns and rhythms of the space. And if we think back to how artwork did that, back to the 60s, for example, with the Situationist, that very much relied on counter-visual strategies. So kind of taking the visual control systems of our cities and subverting them, changing the messages of advertisements and such. And what I see in your projects here is very much about making visual. It's of course the city is dealing with new dilemmas today, which these artworks are responding to. But for example, visualizing data pollution, as in the Andrea Polli work, particle force, and also visualizing this activist archive via cartoons and in another way. In different ways. So I would like to ask you, and maybe you will all respond to this, and while doing so, I will just mention to the audience that you're welcome to think about questions too. We have a microphone also that will run around. So maybe you will all respond to what this ability to visualize the invisible in our cities today, why that is important, and maybe you can relate it to the artworks you just presented. So what has been significantly important about visualizing the invisible, and why is that tactic, how can I say, effective today?
So we can define the invisible in many different ways. One is this technological, and that really relies from city to city, how open are those systems, from the data, from the traffic, is it public or not, or air pollution. Actually, I show in this project that actually there is a public data from even 2 different sources in Zagreb, but then we choose another. So all these kind of systems, or are we talking about more like representational, like Italo Calvino, and notions of situationists, like deterrent you mentioned? So there are very different, actually, approaches to what's invisible makes invisible. And we have been discussing all these aspects during our curatorial meetings while discussing the projects. And some of them rely on such as infrastructure, some not. So actually it's very case-to-case answer to that, but actually that, yes, we did discuss it. And actually I show in these 3 different projects actually how we address actually those different questions in quite different ways. It's a very practical based answer, I think, that I provide in my 5-minute presentation.
I would say that making visible has been always, I don't think it's a contemporary need. I think it's something that has been there since we got together and had to live our lives together. So in a way, it's about using visibility to change power relations, empowering the ones that don't have a voice. So I think it's an opportunity, seeing non-humans that can help us deal with our practices. So I would say that it's an ongoing need and practice as well. But maybe now, for us, the question was how to use urban screens to make that disclosure. And that was the question, basically. And sometimes, yes, using technologies to make visible possible. But in general, the idea would be why and how within urban screens. That'd be, I think, the big question.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's very interesting the fact to mention to highlight the how, and it's something with access. I'm always this word is a bit strange because I think it relates a lot to this idea of how to access something. And the thing with these big screens is that they are very imposant, and there's something about that also that it's not. The biggest, the more accessible and the more rich you get and the deeper relation you build. So that's also a question maybe that was raised also in the different collaborations. And the fact that there are also very discrete things that you can deal with. And for instance, this system is really discrete, and it raises also questions about the limits of this access for the people to participate as well. Because that's always something that we see in this kind of things. How participation happens, really. This is another question. But I think it's important that these projects propose alternative channels, really. And then come the how do they propose these alternative channels, and what are the specific way people can then access these contents and really modify them or have a kind of interaction with them. But these are still open questions. I guess that's also where it doesn't stop, but really continues.
Thank you. Now I'm just looking at the time. Where are we? Oh, we already. Yes, exactly. Do we have any questions from the audiences? Yes, Minna has one, and there's a microphone on the way.
Yes. Not really a question, so I hope not to take too much time. I'm Minna from Helsinki, and Helsinki doesn't have artistic or cultural screens. It's totally only commercially operated urban screens. And a point I just wanted to make in regards of the panel topic is that the thing with these environments is, and why open source matters, is that they are usually totally closed systems. They are black boxes, and to do any kind of artistic experimentation is impossible. So that's why it's really important that institutions like Zagreb Contemporary Art Museum and Medialab-Prado, of course, who have a really strong open source culture there, it's important that these organizations do work with these screens.
Thank you, Minna. One more question here, Barbara?
No, just a remark, and actually also a little bit of a question. In Croatia, you seem to have used, if I see this correctly, your open source approach as a platform for political debate. Where is the artistic curatorial, maybe it slipped my attention, but where's your curatorial influence or input in this? And that leads me actually to a first concluding remark from me, is that probably also depending on the political context or even the country, the city you are working in, these platforms may be used in a completely different way. And there's no one size fits all. It won't be used the same everywhere. It's very dependent on the local context. I'm not sure if I'm correct. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct. So I could answer twofold. One is from the particular case of media facade that is there, and from around that. Another one is from wider cultural developments in Croatia. So within the first one, very framed, there's a European project dealing with media facade. I'm commissioned to create something for that very facade. Actually, you can see from how I was escaping the very facade, going all around, even to the shopping mall, to the questionnaires, to the web platform, all the way around, actually dealing with this facade, but with many, many more possible doors, and including as bigger, different kind of audiences, of all genders, all ages, because children been also questioned for their problems. That makes another invisible, because when talking about invisibility, this is relational things. Yeah? So that's approach how, if I'm limited with this technical thing that is this huge media facade, how can I approach it from all other angles to deal with it? And another one is this open source culture, which is unfortunately not as big as I would like to. It's very little number of people dealing with that. Some of them more like cultural workers on ideological basis, some of them, and very little hacktivist and technological development of. There are very little, can be much more. Somehow it's not as big as I would like to see it. And involving that grassroots, basically, NGO, which is an organization that made a housing project, the project about housing. That's a quite nice approach, which was actually taking out of the open idea of the open call of the project by Technical Tech Collective, but yeah, I applied there. So I did choose, my curatorial thing was to choose NGO that will provide some content. And this is not one artist, so this is kind of one step further than classical curatorial art think curator choose one artist, but it's all the way around, and actually it's even the collective. And this is just one of the outputs, because also they produce the newspapers, website, and so on the same thing. So this is part of their, let's say, campaign kind of thinking. So I don't know, did I answer your question?
Thank you, Darko. And we have a questions from Dr. Norbert Streitz.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for all the great presentations, and also for your nice introduction. I have the following question, because this is like kind of taking stock of what the Connecting Cities network achieved, etc., and so forth. So I would like to ask each of you, and maybe quick, short answers, because we don't have so much time. Maybe other people would like to ask questions too. How much did the Connecting Cities network facilitate what you were doing? So question one, was this already a project you had in mind and would have done anyway? Or second, was this a project which was initiated and triggered by this call for proposals? And then, we don't need the euros, but in terms of, was there a kind of trade-off financing between some money from the Connecting Cities network and how much your own budget was necessary to complete the project, like maybe percentage-wise or something like that? So I think it's important also to know what is the impact of these funding of these existing network beyond, of course, the invaluable exchange with people and having this network and the personal and professional contacts, right?
Who wants to start?
I think they already mentioned in a couple of moments that in some moments this was possible really thanks to this organizational model. Like Andrea Poli with two guys bringing them from New Mexico, this plane ticket just cost as this cost. If we will not share it, they will not be there. It's as simple as that. So on the plane, this is just something, when you share the cost, it's just working better. This media facade also from a particular point of view from me, it's there. So there's always program on something. So this project helps to have another level of project. So just put it simple, you have a bigger focus and budget to realize this project. Anyhow, it's all the time something is there. But yeah, so this was, we can bring something to another level. And we can also test the very system, make it differently, because the system is using some very obsolete Chinese non-maintained software. So we use this one to experiment with it and get it over. So it was improving our local experience, how to use the system, this very project. Without it, we would just not have money and time and focus to do it. And from, yeah, so this is from the institutional point of view. And from the personal, I don't know, I'm busy with these notions of application of media to architecture for very, very long time. Even from when I was 18, and I was graduate gymnasium, that was my thesis in 85.
So very briefly, we only selected projects from the open call, so we wouldn't have done them, but the projects had a proposal, so we knew more or less what the project was about, and that's how we selected them. And what the network has allowed us we had the facade before, of course, but the budget has been fundamental to give stability to the production of projects, to have wider collaborations and larger projects, I would say. And these years have been the economical crisis in Spain, so without the EU money, we wouldn't have had at all any money whatsoever. So it's been absolutely fundamental at all those levels.
Well, I'm not an institution, so I cannot answer for email, for instance. I just think it's very interesting to the last question about the political content. Something that really struck me in the different projects is that you cannot escape this, especially when you're talking about public space, and this makes those projects very interesting because it's not about doing screensaver art thingy, but more really engaged project with the public space, and I find it really super important and very interesting.
Thank you. And now I'm learning that time is up. So instead of asking this as a question, which is really what I wanted to get at, I will make like a closing remark. Just very briefly, because I think that what is so interesting is that Connecting Cities and the project you just explained to us demonstrate how we can really make visible the invisible, how urban media art can really stimulate awareness in urban spaces, also by dragging on the sources and exposing the open source. We need to get more access to the sources, of course. But what is interesting, and where I think Connecting Cities version 2 could move maybe, is to dig more into and explore more that movement from awareness, the open source, and to where we actually, or where the artwork actually instigates change, where it affects agency, thinking, behavior, opinion, action, where we kind of move to that extra level, which I know that a lot of artworks do already, and it has to start somewhere, but where do we move to that? And that would have been my question, your thoughts on that, but instead it will be my closing remark. So thank you very much, DARKO, NEREA and LORAINE for sitting in this panel and accepting my questions and the audience questions, and thank you for listening to this session.